Hi, everybody. I first want to thank the conference presenters for inviting me here. I'm really excited to be in Berlin, and particularly excited yesterday to see May Day, which is all the activities. How, far and wide did everybody come? Who thinks they're the farthest that came here today? Berlin people? Anyone from the US? Anyone? Boston. Okay, you come from where I come from. It's far. A long trip. So today I want to talk about how we hear that the rise of big data is going to change the world that we live in. But I think that big data will not change the world unless it's collected and synthesized into tools that have a public benefit. I run something called the Civic Data Design Lab. And at my research lab, we take data, something that looks like this, a spreadsheet, and translate it into visualizations that we hope expose and affect policy issues. So I like to use this example, this project I worked on with Laura Kurgan, where we took incarceration data, the places where people lived before they were put in prison. We added it up block by block and found there are many blocks in the US where over $1 million is spent to incarcerate people. These 17 blocks in Brownsville, Brooklyn, almost $17 million was spent to incarcerate people from these blocks, but little money was allocated to the types of resources that would alleviate them from going to prison. So these are things like job training programs, reentry programs, and the idea was to visualize this data and bring it to broader publics. These maps ended up in the Museum of Modern Art. It's paired with a map that shows where all those resources are going to prisons upstate in New York. And I think one of the things that's interesting about this particular project is this idea of bringing it to people so they can use it in the way that they want to use it. And so actually a congressman saw this map in the Museum of Modern Art and used it in his presentation to Congress to work on the Criminal Justice Reinvestment Act of 2010. So he asked if he could borrow some of our images for his presentation. And obviously our maps did not have the results, but we affected a politician in allocating $25 million to reentry programs in the US, which would help people returning home from prison. So the idea that visualizations and bringing them to broader publics can activate a kind of change. So I think we've heard a lot today about excuse me, how data visualization and data can be harmful to our privacy, but data can also be used for public good, so I think it can be used for both sides of the force, good and evil. I think I try to work on the side of Yoda and bring us data visualizations that have a public good. In my lab, I make 3 calls. I think we need to have a call for data literacy. More open data means we have more access to it, but that doesn't necessarily mean we have people who are literate to use that data. I also think we need to make a call for new data visualization and collection tools. In order for us to tell our own stories from our community's perspective, we need to create tools from that perspective in order to tell governments about our needs. And 3, I think we need private data for a public good. Something like 80% of the data now stored is owned by private organizations, but has a possible public benefit. Today, what I want to talk to you about is number 2. New data visualization and collection tools. And I think data tools for policy development can be really impactful. They allow citizens to collect data outside the formal channels of government and really tell their own story. So I'm going to tell a story about one of my data collection projects. It's called Digital Matatus. It's a partnership with the Computing and Informatics Department at University of Nairobi, the Center for Sustainable Urban Development at Columbia University, my research lab at MIT, and it's funded by the Rockefeller Foundation. And it started from this premise that Nairobi suffers from severe congestion problems. And this is a very typical scene on the streets of Nairobi, traffic jams, and this is an issue in many of our fast-developing cities across the world. I've been working in Nairobi for some time. Actually, I created one of the first GIS data sets for Nairobi, looking at issues around transportation and congestion. We created a transportation model, which you can see here, which looks at congestion along the roadway. We also created a density map for that model. But one of the biggest issues as we were kind of trying to think about how we plan and redirect traffic in Nairobi is we did not have information on matatus. These are these small vans that 3.5 million people in Nairobi depend upon to get around the city. And, to get, I'm just going to give you a little video of what a matatu is, just in case you don't know.
If you wouldn't know better, you could be in a club or a bar, but you're not. You're in a minibus driving through Nairobi. And with volumes like this, you'd better not come on an empty stomach. On the outside, they're painted in hot designs. And their name matatu is derived from the Kiswahili words for 3 cents for a ride, which nowadays is more like 30 cents. The fares are raised by the conductors. Traveling by matatu is a daily reality for millions of Kenyans.
So, matatus are something that everybody in Nairobi loves to hate. Just like most public transport, it's the top of a conversation. And to get a matatu, you simply have to register it in the government and then have somebody make you a sign. This is actually a matatu sign driver in Kibera. The number 8 goes through Kibera. But the system is hard to navigate. We didn't know where it was or how to add it to our model. We went to City Council, and this was the best data set that we could find. Mind you, there's 132 matatu routes. These were the routes that we found in City Council, clearly not 132. So we thought, how can we create raw data for our model to create better transportation planning in Nairobi, but that create data that everyone can access and use and benefit from? Nairobi uses cell phones for almost everything, and one example of that is something called M-Pesa. You can buy coffee with M-Pesa. You can even buy a matatu ride with M-Pesa. It's like your credit card. It sends cell phone minutes for cash. And we thought, how can we leverage the ubiquitous nature of cell phone use in Nairobi, Kenya, to capture data about the informal transit systems which most citizens depend upon, and open that data for anyone to use and build upon? We developed an app which we used on matatus, and we collected data in something called GTFS. Has anybody heard of GTFS? One person, that's more than most times that I ask that question. You probably all use GTFS today in order to find your way in public transport on Google Maps. The underlying data structure is GTFS. So you use GTFS all the time, and it allows us to perform routing, and many open source software products are built on this system. So we decided to collect data in this system so that anybody could benefit from the many open source tools that use this package for transportation and routing. So what does GTF actually look like? Here is GTFS coming into our data stream. It really is just a unique identifier. It has information about the latitude and longitude of stops. It has information about routes. And as you put it together, it begins, and as the data was coming in, it creates a map. And here is the map that we began to create of Nairobi's matatu system. And one of the things that you can see here is we collected data on stops, both informal and then these blue, which are in, formal is orange and informal is blue. And this was very important for a model. But one of the issues we had is when you look at this, it's hard to read. It's not accessible to everyone. It looks simply like the roadway. So we started to play around with how could we translate this into something that people in Nairobi could read, could understand. We began to, this is the Thika Road routes. You can see there's 10 different routes that kind of splinter off. How could we make sense of this data? We began to create a legend. We played around with colors. And ultimately, we began to have something like this, but it was still quite hard to understand. And so we decided to stylize it in a style very similar to something that you would see in the London subway system or Paris or even Berlin, New York, and create a stylized map of Nairobi's matatus. And we did this for a very important reason. We wanted to make a point about how extensive the system was. It's comparable to other global cities. We wanted people in Nairobi to feel proud about their matatu system, but we also wanted the government to feel proud about the system as well. We used methods in which to create the system that were very important in Nairobi. The stops that you see here are landmarks. In Nairobi, they use landmarks to get around the city. So you see that we didn't have all the stops that we collected originally in the data set, but we created strategic stops in order for people to read the maps themselves. Ultimately, we created a map of the whole system, which you can see here. But one of the things that was really important to this data collection project is that we asked people in Nairobi what they thought of the maps, and they helped us actually build this data set. So what you're seeing right here are the matatu drivers helping edit our map. And one of the things that's very clear in this particular video is the lack of routes in the north of the city, and the matatu drivers instantly began to edit the map and think about new routes that they could add in that area. And so one of the important things about being able to visualize this particular data set is that we could create a planning tool that is not just something that's used in data and models, but a planning tool that everybody in Nairobi can access and use. And so the matatu drivers were very excited to use this map. And I think that's one of the important things about any data project is it shouldn't just be something that you do in isolation. We included government, stakeholders, NGOs, matatu drivers, and owners in the process all along. We invited them to join us in our data collection process. We held workshops. Now, that doesn't mean that the government necessarily participated, but it does mean that they have buy-in, and I'm going to tell you a little bit more about that in a second. But the other thing that we did, and this is actually us editing the map with a group of stakeholders, and ultimately releasing this version of the map that included a matrix in the back which helps people better navigate their particular stop. We also held a hackathon, and this was really important because the data format, GTFS, is known to many people in the transportation field, but not everyone. And if we wanted the local tech community to build apps with it, they needed to know how to use this data standard. There are now 5 apps that use this data product. This is a Sonar, which is a popular routing app in Nairobi, as well as something called Moth Reroute, which is also a very popular out in Nairobi, which people use it to route themselves, but also complain about traffic accidents and tell us about local conditions on the road. A crash or an accident can change dramatically your commute. It can take it from a half an hour to 2 hours. And so this app has become one of the biggest apps in Nairobi, which was started off of our data set. But I think one of the most interesting and exciting moments for us was when we got invited to a press conference by the government where they told us this is the new official map of the city. This is them giving it to the governor of Nairobi. And I think why this is really important is because we included the government in the data process, they felt okay acquiring the maps and making it the official map of the city. Even though they didn't necessarily participate in the data collection process, they could finally see the benefit and value to them. And they could trust the data because we were open about how we were creating it. The maps went viral once the government supported it. And one of the things that I like to talk about is how do you measure success in an open data project? And I think that's when others leverage the data we generate to create their own policy change. So here the government released the map. But since this time, I've seen the map in many different locations. This is a meeting I saw at a UN Habitat. You see the map at the top. And they use the data to analyze new commuter rail routes. And this is the ultimate route map for commuter rail. Looks very similar, doesn't it, guys, to my map? Same colors even. Maybe the Thika Road route is orange. It's now the Simba route. And I think what's really important about this is that visualization has an effect on public consciousness because the popularity of the digital Matatu maps was something that the UN Habitat wanted to leverage for their own change and getting people to support the commuter rail lines. Since the time of the map, we've had many other cities ask us to help out, and they've been doing this work on their own. Kampala's one, Accra is another one. They just completed their maps. I just heard the Dominican Republic just finished their own maps. There's also a group in Amman. But also, I'm really excited to say that in August, Google made Nairobi the first informal transit system in Google Maps. So you can actually navigate the city of Nairobi and find out which matatu you can take by searching on Google. So also, I think this is a really interesting picture. It's us at the Google release, but in the center is the head of the National Transportation Safety Association, who was really excited that we released this data on Google Maps and is now willing to share data with us. And I think opening up data allows you to receive data, and it allows you to create more policy change because you can make more decisions with better data. So semi-formal transit provides mobility around the world. And right now, we're really interested in creating a resource network and almost OpenStreetMap type system for creating GTFS data for these informal systems. Almost every day, somebody calls me about whether I can do their own city. And so one of the next steps in this project is to create a resource center and standard so that other people can do this work. All right, so this is one data story in a very developing country context. I thought I would tell you about another data story in the US, a very different context. And this is a project that I did in New York City, which is looking at the garment district. And the garment district is a district in New York City that has protected zoning. That means that people who manufacture in this district have decreased rents. So where it might be $18 per square foot, the actual rent, if let's say a lawyer had that office space, would be $52. So they get huge protections for being in the garment district. And you can understand why. It's around all the major subway lines, right near Times Square, between the Port Authority bus station and the train station. It's high-value real estate. And protection's important because fashion is really produced in the garment district. These are some of the factories, and you can really see fashion on the street. So fashion designers were really up in arms by the potential rezoning. The city wanted to remove the zoning in the garment district and move it out into Long Island City and kind of farther places afield. And the fashion designers said it's this interworking of wholesalers, designers, retailers, manufacturers that make the district work. If you move the manufacturers out, the industry will simply collapse. On the other hand, manufacturing in the United States has declined 81% since 1980. This is the same for New York City and the US. And a lot of the landlords were arguing that really there is a lot of vacancy in this district. But one of the things that you can see is that the apparel industry is actually declining significantly, and this is the first map shows 1994, but it's only being maintained in those areas that have protection. So that zip code in the last map and bottom have zoning protection for manufacturing. So it's shrinking back to its core, the place that it's being supported. And 79% of garment apparel work happens in this Midtown Manhattan region. So you can see that there would be a huge effect of this multi-million-dollar industry if it was moved out of the city. And here's a map showing all of the garment-related industry work in and around the garment industry. And so I thought, how can we solve this debate? The city claims one thing, the landlords claim another, the fashion designers claim another. And how can we prove that really it's the proximity and interworking of the district itself that makes it successful? And so we started a project called Industry in Motion, which uses smartphones to explore the manufacturing industry in the garment district. And so what we did is tracked 100 fashion designers for a 2-week period where they collected data everywhere they went. And so this is actually an intern. They checked into Foursquare, and we were tracking them on their phone. We collected that data. That data went ultimately to a map. We signed up people through website, through canvassing, to get people all around the city. And this is the ultimate representation of that data. You can see a lot of people go to the garment center. But what does that mean? How do we quantify this? This is a great image that shows that there's lots of activity. But what do we do with that data to make sense of it? So we categorize things into different trips and then categorize the trips. So this is one of my favorite trips. A trip is when somebody leaves the studio and comes back. This person went to Venue, which is a bead store. New York Beads, bead store. Fun to Beads, bead store. Tahoe Shoho, bead store. Beads World, Meyer Imports that sells beads. Q Exmarts that sells beads. One of the things this person was clearly doing was going out of their office, getting beads, and then coming back. And this is one of the things that they mentioned as being really important to a thriving garment industry, is the ability to have access to the things that they produce and to do that in quick time. So we also mapped out all the locations that they went to. And one of the things the fashion designers were telling us is that 8th Avenue is the hub of manufacturing. And that's actually what you get from the data results. This yellow is all the manufacturing areas. And this is quite different from what we saw on the traditional business map that I showed you earlier. That business map showed things hugging Broadway. So when the city was going to rezone, they want to lob off that 8th Avenue corridor. The fashion designers were saying, no, 8th Avenue is more important. You should cut off Broadway. And this helped us to prove that information. The other thing that we found is that people inside the garment district, those fashion designers that work inside it, and those outside both benefit from the garment district. So they both make about the same amount of trips, 101 minutes or about 150 minutes of trip time per day. But garment district designers can make 9 trips, so they can go out whenever they feel like it. But those outside can benefit from it. They make 4 trips on average per day. So they come in, they chain their trips, and then they go out. So they benefit from this agglomeration economy. We also found that one of the comments that the city was making is that it's only small designers that really use the garment district. What you can see here is this yellow represents manufacturing. It's large and mid-level designers that are using it the most. And what they're doing is they're producing fashion that then gets sent all over the world to be produced. So when people talk about manufacturing being dead in New York City, what's not happening is these large runs that go into J. Crew. What's actually happening is J. Crew is producing the styles that then get sent all over the world in the garment district. And that's a huge industry. It's about a $31 billion industry in New York, so they would be seriously affected. So what happened? From this data analytics, we were able to shelve the rezoning. They actually modified the zoning to keep the 8th Avenue and to open up much of the corridor along Broadway. And it shows how data can be really informative and actionable in creating change in the district. So I say if data is the new infrastructure, we need to think about how we can use data as a public good. So just like we were building pipes at the turn of the last century, we are building data pipes at this time. And so many of the projects that I work on advocate for data literacy. This is a project that I work on with New York City Public Schools, where we're using lottery data to understand probability. And more recently, we're looking at the issue of ghost cities. These are cities that are completely developed in China that nobody lives in. And we're able to identify those ghost cities using activity on social media. And so this is one of the ones that we've identified. So with that, I want to open it up for questions and really talk about how you might use data for a public good in your city. Thank you.
Applause. Thank you so much. Show us your hands if you have questions, please. There's one gentleman there in the middle.
The one who knows GTFS. He was the one who knew. Now I'm putting you on the spot.
Hi. And my question is about GTFS. If you compare Nairobi with Germany, there are a lot of similarities about the data. And the problem with Germany is that we do not have or almost no timetables in GTFS to release under open data. In the whole Germany, with hundreds of transportation companies, we have around 5 to 7 companies which publish GTFS data as open source. And you're absolutely right, you can do a lot of good things with that, but how do we persuade organizations to release their data so that we can use this data for the public good? What would be your arguments?
Right. This is a very good question, and this was actually a huge issue in the US when we started to use GTFS, because technically the public organizations are very worried about opening this data up because they're afraid of getting sued for inaccuracies in the data. And we had a number of course cases in our legal system to allow it so that they would not get sued for some of the inaccuracy if it went up into Google. And so I think, how do we ensure that we can have open data? And in many ways, I think there's a lot of policies that still need to be developed to help protect those people who want to put their data up. So who's responsible if it's incorrect is one of the biggest concerns, I think, for some of these transport systems and why they're not putting the data. Another issue, I think, and one of the things that really helped push this forward in the US, so we had a lot of problems when we first started using GTFS, and it was really Obama created the Open Data Law, which really said government agencies need to put up data. Any data that government agencies create, data has to go up. Now, the MTA or other public transports are not government agencies, but because they do receive funding from government, they do then have to put their data up into the system.
Maybe one more, right in the front. Up here?
I think it's you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for that speech and talk. How about, I mean, you mentioned a lot about visualization and you played around with colors. How did you do that? Like, who's part of the team? What kind of disciplines are involved? And how,
Right.
yeah.
I'm so glad you asked that question. I'm really glad you asked that question because I think to make data work, you really need to work with teams of people. And so in the Nairobi project, we had a team of people. So I'm a data analyst, a data technician, but we also have graphic designers on our team working with us. And then it's not just graphic designers. I have policy experts. I think whenever you work on a particular project, you need to have somebody who specializes in that particular policy to help that team really guide its future. So the criminal justice project I showed at the beginning, we had criminal justice policy experts. In the Nairobi project, we had people, policy experts in transportation. Same with the zoning issues in New York. I think it really helps then figure out the best way to target your audience, but then also have a data analyst. So I usually have 3 people: my graphic person, my data analytics person, and my policy person, and then my person with local knowledge, which we had it also in Nairobi. Sometimes I act as the graphic and data person, but it's nice to have 2 people on that team. But building teams to work with data is essential, and I would encourage it for all of you.
Unless one hand goes up very quickly, that's all I think we have time for. Yes, on stage right now. I just want to say I think this has been, it's so fabulous that you're here. I so enjoyed your talk. I know your map from walking into iHub and seeing it there, and it was just great to have everything put into context here, and just wanted to take the opportunity to point out that we actually have one of the founders, Jessica Colasso, here.
Okay.
Evans is here from iHub, and so is Nanjira, so people working in different corners of that organization, mostly hanging around at the gig maker space.
Right.
So
Okay,
this is really great also to, yeah.
And I should say that iHub map is a different map from our map. They did a stylized version of that, which is beautiful, but I just want to make sure it's clear, especially since the iHub people are here.
Okay, okay, but still great to make that connection.
Thanks.
And yeah, thanks so much for being with us. Hope you're going to be hanging out with us.
Yes,
for the
I'll
next
be
days?
hanging out.
Wonderful.
Love to answer questions if I see you around.
Big round of applause to Sarah, please.
Thanks, guys.
You